Little glimpse, what draws you here tonight? What kind of questions or curiosity from whatever it is that you encountered? Why are you here tonight?
Curiosity.
Okay.
Just,
That's plenty.
Just wanting to learn.
Yeah.
A friend of mine invited me, and the title, Awakening Warrior, is very resonant. How you interpret it, we'll find out shortly.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very ambiguous frame with many levels of meaning. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and what you mean by awakening too.
Yeah. Beautiful.
I'm a Kundalini yoga practitioner.
Yeah.
All
right.
It's
So now.
it's certainly the time for awakening warriors on the planet.
Oh yeah. Say one or two sentences on that. Why is this a time for awakening warriors on this planet, as you say it?
Well, because the planet is currently in the state of enormous flux and profound transformation to a higher consciousness that it has to achieve, or the whole thing goes down. So,
Yeah.
I mean, it's been spoken of for many, many millennia,
Yeah.
and this is the time when saying, we are the ones we've been waiting for.
Okay. Thank you. Velcro, I just realized I have a little tripod. If that, you think that's useful?
Or I could just set it here, probably.
Yeah, however you want to do it.
Let's do that.
Yeah. Anything else on what draws you here tonight?
Personally, I'm at the stage in my self-studies where I'm really into Jung, and I'm really personally working with the warrior archetype, but how that looks is so subjective. Like,
Yeah.
There is no such thing as the warrior. There is just the archetype and what it means to the individual. So, I'm very inspired to understand, as someone else said, the awakening process of that.
Beautiful. Thank you. Yeah.
That's actually one of my first events here, and for me, I saw the title, and then it's more like when two frequencies are similar, they have this like resonance, and they amplify things a bit, right? So I feel like it's just more of a frequency, like a resonance, that draws. Just like a natural law of everything, like without its way give back, right? So, I guess I'm just picking up on that.
So here you are.
Just walking off the street, right?
Yeah.
Well, I came to see you guys again. It's been such a long time, and our paths have woven in many years past, and we know some of the same people. Yeah, in times past. It's so wonderful to see you both again and hear what you're up to. And, yeah.
Still doing the same work in different forms. We were working with change agents in the oil patch, actually.
Yes.
Yeah, another lifetime ago, but still working with
I also spent a
transformation.
little time with the Special Forces, so it's
Yeah.
really quite
Oh, you
interesting.
did?
Yes.
Okay. Didn't know that.
Yeah. Yeah, so great.
Thank you, Sean.
I'm looking at the slide.
Oh, I'm not there, I can't see it.
Yeah, for people who didn't hear earlier, the images on the screen are just a smattering of images related to the story we're telling. If this is a day-long workshop, we might be able to give commentary on them all. But Jacob, whenever you think it's good to just welcome people from your side and then call
Do
them.
we do you want to use the mic, or how do you feel? Does it feel good with the mic? People, let's use the mic.
Yeah, let's use the mic.
It'll be clear on the recording, too.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you for coming out tonight, everybody. My name's Jacob, events organizer for Banyen Books. And I guess before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that we are on the unceded territory of the Coast Salish people, including the territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. And I'm actually going to turn it over to Colin, who is Banyen's founder. He's going to say a few words of welcome for our honored guests.
Hi, welcome everybody. It's wonderful to be able to actually meet together and personally live human being breathing together. And it's a great pleasure to welcome Joel and Michelle, who are, you might say, among the pioneers of Banyen. Michelle worked in the store back in 1978 and 79, and 80 and 81, 82. You know, lifetimes ago it seems. But and they've been dear old friends, and here's another dear old friend of Ryan. Joel and Michelle have been in the mind sciences and contemplative work, real pioneers and integrators. And as you'll hear tonight, they were actually chosen and chose to do a training for the U.S. Army. Is it the Green Berets?
Special Forces, yeah.
Special Forces. And they'll describe all that. The story is in the book. It's quite amazing. And so the sense of the what is you might say an echo warrior for our time, you know, and the qualities that we might learn and exemplify for the next generation. So I want to welcome Joel and Michelle Levey.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'd just like to build on that welcome and welcome you all as well. My name's Michelle Levey, and it's so special for me to be here because Banyen's always held such a beloved place in my heart. I really kind of awakened on my spiritual path when I was working here, and it was a real turning point, pivotal point, time in my life, and we deepened our friendship over 5 decades. So it's great to be here with new friends and old friends, and I want to thank the whole Banyen staff. And yes, Jacob's still back there, but everyone, Colin, Roseanne, for hosting us and helping to bring this about. And we're excited to share the story with you.
And I really want to acknowledge Colin and Lozanne of having shared the dream of this book coming into form for decades. I think Jer and Laura, you watched this emerge, back in the 80s as well. And so, yeah, there are seats around, so feel free to come up.
Sorry.
Yeah. So what we'd like to share with you this evening, just to frame things, the bones of this story are wrapped around a historic and once secret 6-month, fully immersive program that we did for 2 A-teams of Special Forces troops, Green Berets. A lot of people have heard of SEAL Team 6. Basically, you could envision 2 SEAL Team 6s with Joel and Michelle for 6 months full time. We worked with their families. We took them on a month-long silent meditation retreat called the Encampment. We had a lab with hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of biofeedback and neurofeedback equipment. It was most people leave a talk like this and say it would make a really good movie. But it's kind of a mind-blowing story, especially for 2 former peace activists.
We're still peace activists.
Yes, still continuing. So we just that's the bones of the story. The real juicy, fleshy parts of it are really about the kind of special kind of courage we all need right now to move through a pretty scary world that's rather fragile and subject to a lot of suffering and pain. And there isn't a whole lot of wisdom functioning.
And there
there's many warriors, but not necessarily warriors who are really deeply awakened to their true humanity and their discernment, and coming from a place of non-reactivity, but of just real deep presence. So in many ways, this is really, our heart title for this book is A Special Kind of Courage. So as we tell the story and as we kind of invite you into this, we'd like you to just reflect for yourself, for people in your field of operations, for the world in general, how different things would be unfolding in our world if more of this kind of view and understanding and this kind of skill set were more widely and universally available. If our kids were learning this in junior high and high school and going out into the world from there. So we'll have time for questions towards the end, I think, just so we can kind of keep it really focused. Please hold your questions. And we'll see where we roll from here. So for a moment, I just invite you, just take a look around, see where you are. Notice a few things you haven't seen yet. And just kind of marvel at being in such a zone of peace and beauty. And this really is a sacred space that has been created here in Kitsilano. And maybe take a look around and go, yeah, just see who you're with. And just, oh, another myself. Yeah. Just like me, he wants to be happy. Just like me, she'd like to feel safe. Here we all are together, taking refuge in a place of beauty and abundance, and feeling the great privilege of this in a pretty tumultuous world. And if you like, just pause for a moment, touch your heart, or look into your heart, and just consider, think of some challenging situation in your life now, or that may be hovering in the future, that is stretching you to find a deeper kind of courage. It could be some family situation, it could be something with regards to just the fragility of the systems we rely upon or the environment. It could be any part of your life where you're called to find a deeper kind of courage. And then envision calling in an ally, someone who to you embodies the special kind of courage that you'd like to embody more fully yourself. And just be mindful who comes to mind. And call them close to you and actually reach out with a hand and hold their hand and have a sense that they're like an outrigger on your canoe, and you can draw some strength from Aunt Mabel or from Jesus or from Tara or Manjushri or St. Francis, and breathe in some of that light and that strength, and let your gratitude, your light, your blessings flow back to them. Yeah. And then imagine that whoever you're reaching out to reaches out to whoever they reach out to for strength, for inspiration, for blessings, whoever they reach out to take refuge in. And they in turn reach out to those who they reached out to, and they in turn reach out to those who they reach out to. And as you breathe in, just sense these streams of ancestral wisdom and strength and power and blessing filling you, and your gratitude, your love, your blessings flowing back upstream to them all. And just feel what it's like to have this sense of resourcefulness, of refuge, of not aloneness as you face whatever challenge calls your heart to find a deeper kind of courage. Yeah. And if you like, just letting them all just sort of smile upon you and bathe you in their light, and then just melt into the light and melt into you, and maybe just touch your heart or look into your heart for a moment and just feel how that lands for you. The kinds of guys that we worked with on the kinds of missions that they would face, their worst and most dangerous enemy was their own inner enemies, their own fear, their own bewilderment, their own reactivity, their own sense of insufficiency. And part of our program, essentially written in the contract, was to help these guys learn to recognize and befriend their inner enemies and stop the war inside. And we taught them practices like this. You know, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, or the shitstorm of war, or or I'm in enemy territory and they're looking for me, I will fear evil, but I will realize I'm connected. I have resources I can draw upon. There are outriggers on my canoe rather than I'm out here all by myself, feeling really vulnerable and alone. So just a little glimpse of some of the kind of technology that we were teaching these guys and how to make that sort of real for themselves.
So now we'd like to invite you to consider, just for a few moments here, if you were asked, if you had the opportunity to train 2 elite teams of special forces troops who might potentially be in a position to start or stop the next world war, as these guys could have been, what would you feel was important to teach them? And you had this opportunity to design a full-on immersive 6-month program to give them the kinds of skills and wisdom, compassion that they would need to make wise decisions. You know, what do you think would be important? What would you want to design into the curriculum? Just take a few moments to listen into that. Oh,
I would teach them Kundalini yoga.
you've already got
Okay.
that. Okay. Come on.
Please, there are seats, so just be creative. Feel free to come up.
Yeah, there's seats on both sides.
Yeah. Okay,
Any
Kundalini yoga.
Kundalini yoga, and we'll come back to the warrior aspect of that. Yeah.
I would say there's many, many tools, but perhaps the most important thing to me would be the continuity of their practice through time, to really deepen it so that it becomes them.
Yeah.
And there's a multitude of tools.
Right.
Yeah.
Continuity of practice, sustaining those tools.
I would suggest a breath work to encourage deep mindfulness and staying present, as opposed to going to fear and what if.
Yeah, thank you.
I just love what you mentioned, to stop the war inside, because it's everything, the war inside, with whatever tool. And by what? By teaching that you are loved, that you are not alone, that you are still part of everything. And tools, endless, whatever each one resonates.
Yeah.
But the aim is to stop the war inside.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Essential. Yeah.
I would think that the principle of non-self, not identifying with your situation, because that's the filter that really gets in the way. You know, so you're not really seeing what's happening, you're seeing what's happening to you. So it's a kind of reactive space.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good point, Julie.
Great ideas. You're all on the design team.
Yeah. So let's take a look at how did a program like this come to be. You know, basically unlimited budget, 6 months full time.
They pulled no other duty. We had them 24/7.
Unheard of, and nothing. You know, George Leonard and Michael Murphy from Esalen and founders of the Human Potential Movement said this is the most extensive and intensive leadership and human development program that's ever been offered. The Army War College, when we submitted the original proposal, just looking at it on paper, said this is the most exquisite orchestration of human technology we've ever seen. So it's pretty epic kind of program. So how did this come to be? One thing was it was post-war in Southeast Asia, and the Army was really broken, and they knew it. There was the My Lai massacre, which was covered up, and when it was exposed, it was horrendous. The suicide wall study was released that showed that more than twice as many men and women committed suicide when they came back than died in combat. And later studies show that it could be between 4 and 20 times more people committing suicide, either fast or slow, than died in combat. And the military leaders who asked for this program lived with a lot of guilt, a lot of shame, and realized they needed to change the training program. At the same time, the Russians were taking everything they had in terms of human development that they were pumping into their Olympic athletes, and were building a special bunch of super soldiers using all of the advanced human tech that they could, and the U.S. Army realized, we don't have one of those. Maybe we should create one. And at the same time, millions and millions of dollars in U.S., Soviet, and Chinese funds are going into stuff like psychic research behind the Iron Curtain and remote viewing and psychotronic research. A friend of ours walked out of a study at Stanford when they had him trying to mess with the electronics on a submarine in an undisclosed location, and he realized that he could do it with his mind, you know? So there was a lot of investment, there was a lot of suffering, there was a lot of pain, there was a lot of competition. And out of this emerged the Delta Task Force. And within the Delta Task Force, their job was to survey the human potential movement and the leadership development movement in business and creativity, and come up with the best vision they could for what the Army could look like if it grew up and got its act together in the year 2000. And our friend Jim Channon was especially assigned to the human potential movement in California and Esalen, and really did his research thoroughly. Spent a lot of time in the hot tubs and a lot of time really exploring deeply. And Jim was kind of a wizard, shaman, creative dude, and an incredible artist. We've got about 18 of his pictures in the book, which kind of adds a beautiful tone to it. But Jim's way of trying to convey the vision of this was to write this cult classic called Evolutionary Tactics, a manual for the 1st Earth Battalion. Evolutionary Tactics, a manual for the 1st Earth Battalion. And that became like the kind of go-to reference for people in the military-industrial complex to conceive of what an earth-stewarding, earth-protecting force would be, that would go into places where natural disasters had happened or where crises were happening, and do everything they could to restore harmony and balance. They were like your earth stewards on steroid kind of vision. And it was an incredibly compelling vision that inspired thousands of people within the military and in the industrial complex back in the late 70s and early 90s. So at one of those Delta Force meetings, a graduate student of mine named Bud Cook, a Hawaiian aikido master, ski instructor, peak performance artist, was invited to do an aikido demonstration. After that session, he was approached by 2 leaders from the Pentagon saying, "We need help. We don't know what to do. Could you design a training program?" And Bud said, "Well, yeah, and I know some people back in Seattle. Let me go talk with them, and we'll see if we can put together a proposal."
So this is all happening in the late 70s, is it?
This is happening in the early 80s, 82. So I'm at work one day. I'm running the pain center and the biofeedback and stress clinic at large HMO, large medical center in Seattle. My receptionist calls me between patients one day and said, "Hey, Bud Cook's on the phone. He says it's really urgent. Can you take a minute to talk to him?" Last time Bud called, it was like, "You want to go sailing in the Bahamas with the mariners and train them in self-regulation techniques for the winter." And it's like, that sounds good, but didn't happen. So I pick up the phone and Bud says, "Hey, Wiz, how would you like to design the ultimate warrior training program for the U.S. Special Forces?" And I wrote my conscientious objector thesis as my high school English project, okay? And Michelle can tell you her version of where she was in those days. So that was a little bit off my paradigm. I took a deep breath and acquired a little bit deeper. I said, let me talk to Michelle. So I came home that night and we talked. Interestingly, the week that Bud called, most of our friends were out raising hell on Hood's Canal where the first Trident submarine was coming in. A submarine packing thousands of times more nuclear explosives than Hiroshima and Nagasaki combined. And they're establishing the largest stash of nuclear weapons on the planet 17 miles from Seattle. And I came home, we talked about it, and we went, damn, if we had a chance to train the crew of a Trident submarine for 6 months, the world would be a safer place. And something in us went, whoa, that's a scary thought. Maybe we should do this. Yeah.
And it also happened that at that time, one of our teachers that we actually met here in Vancouver studying with, Kalu Rinpoche, was actually working at Banyen at the time when he came and gave a public talk at Van Dusen Gardens in '82. And I went, and things never were the same after that. And he had been teaching in Seattle and had just left Seattle to go to Portland to give some teachings. And we were friends with his translator. We had his number, and we said, let's call Tricky and see if he can ask Rinpoche what he thinks about this. Like, with your blessings, we'll consider it. And if you don't think it's good work, right work for us to be doing, good karma, then we won't touch it. And with kind of half hoping Rinpoche would say, no. We called, and Tricky answered, and we explained to him the situation. He said, let me go, I'll speak to Rinpoche, he's close by, I'll be right back. And he came back in a little while, and he said, Rinpoche thinks this is a great opportunity. Definitely, you should. He said, if you have the opportunity to work with people who have a lot of power and may lack the commensurate wisdom and compassion to use that power wisely, and you can do anything to show them more options, to teach them more skills, more discernment on how to make good decisions and choices, by all means, green light, go ahead. It's kind of this sense of, we rely upon you for the success of this program. He didn't say that, but another Lama told us that later. So we said thank you, and we looked at each other, and we were like, oops, I guess we're on for this. So we proceeded to dive into the design.
Yes, Bud comes over. We spend an afternoon basically sketching it out on a napkin. We take it down to our office at that point. We had a little training and consulting firm that was sort of like the business front for the First Earth Battalion and the Human Potential Movement. And we wrote up a proposal, and our office was in the back of the Magic Mouse toy store. You had to walk through the toy store, up a few stairs.
All the little wind-up toys on
And so the FedEx guy comes in, we're all standing there blessing the proposal. He takes it out through all the yapping dogs in the toy store. 3 weeks later, the FedEx guy comes back, and there's an envelope, and we open it up, and it's from the Army, and they said, this is the most exquisite orchestration of human technology, yada, yada, yada. And then it was red tape for 3 years, so we had 3 years to reach out to friends and teachers and mentors and say, if you had a chance to
We asked them the same question that I asked you before.
train 25 guys who might start or stop the next war, be in a position to do that, what would you teach them? So it was an incredible piece of R&D for us. And the chance to just call people like, Felcrow, what do you think? We've never met, but and just be audacious and reach out and just tap the wisdom of people to inform the design for this program. So it was magnificent. The secret sauce was really in the synergy, okay? We worked with their families and kids. First night of the program, we had to reassure all the wives and girlfriends that we weren't going to dose them on heavy loads of LSD like MK Ultra, and that it wasn't one of those kind of programs, and the kids are hooked up to the biofeedback equipment and learning how to control their physiology, and it was fun, and so we needed the families on board. We brought in Aikido as a martial art that really has deep indigenous roots and a real subtlety of awareness in terms of tuning into and blending with energy rather than just being a tough, macho, kind of bust some bones kind of martial artist. It required a whole different kind of sense of power and relatedness than any of the martial arts they were involved with. So that brought in a real subtle quality of embodied, somatic, energetic, indigenous wisdom. And we quoted O Sensei a lot, who was an incredible mystic.
And he was the founder of the martial art of Aikido. It was he had a longer name, but O Sensei was what he was referred to as like the teacher, a kind of respectful way of saying that.
We had all the biotech equipment, the contemplative training. We spent about 2 months in the field doing mission simulations where they had a chance to take what they were learning in the meditation and in the lab and on the mat and at home with their families, and then take it out and do mission simulations with it and see how this stuff was working. So there's this wonderful kind of multi-level, multi-dimensional design to the program that was really in the synergy of that there was great power.
Yeah, and so within that period where we had these years to really cook on what would be optimal training and to speak with our advisors and mentors, another great teacher of ours was Dzong Rinpoche, who had been the abbot of the largest monastic university in Tibet. Very revered, very wise and kind being, and he was also in the neighborhood, and we went to ask him. Same question. What do you think's most important? What should we teach them? And he had a translator, so the answer came to us from the Tibetans through his translator. And the translator said, Rinpoche says, teach them courage. And we looked at each other. Whoa, like that was this big Zen koan question. Courage, how Joel and Michelle are going to teach the Green Berets courage. What does that mean? And, we kept getting, as we went into it, different dimensions of what courage means. Not only the outer courage, but what about that, the levels of inner courage to be within themselves, to be present within themselves, to the workings of their minds, their fears, their emotions. And in fact, as the program went on, or as we were getting into it, we spoke with another one of our friends who was a translator, Tibetan translator, and he said, oh, courage. Well, that word in Tibetan, most likely that Rinpoche used was Ningtop, which means literally heart power. And it could have been translated. Courage was one level of translation, but it could have also been translated as compassion. It could have also been translated as patience and forgiveness. It had all these different nuances of meaning. It's like, okay, what do all of those have to do with courage? It takes a lot of courage to forgive, often. Forgive ourselves, forgive others. It takes a lot of courage to be patient and just stay with uncertainty, stay with the not knowing. And certainly that quality of compassionate heart power was something that definitely got developed in the course of the program.
So these were men that at one point there was a checkout trip for us where, Michelle was mercifully spared from this, but the guys on our team went out. We went rock climbing with them and then suited up and swam across Portland, Maine harbor, dodging freighters one night with the guys. And it's just kind of like, can you guys keep up with us? It's like...
Can you play with us, and then maybe we'll consider playing with you.
And like in the program, like I'm on the Aikido mat with them in the morning, they're in the lab with us in the afternoon. So it took some courage.
Definitely.
For me to
us.
step out there. The other guys on our team were like real jocks and real skilled, and it's like, and really competitive, and they got to play that out a lot. Me, it was a huge trust walk to step out there. But we passed muster with them, and they finally said, okay, we're crossing a threshold today. This is what our mission is from here on. It's all top secret. If anybody comes up to you at the grocery store and asks what you're up to, they're probably KGB, Russian, Soviet intelligence. If you pick up the phone, assume they're listening, and it was just kind of like a little spooky. But so they were in this big room. It's like pre-digital, and so it's all paintings on the wall in this big briefing room. And it's like, pull back the curtains, and there's maps of Eastern Europe. And they go on to describe that the mission for these guys, and this was when there were like 300 satellites in the sky. So if you wanted to see what was going on way over there, you had to send eyeballs. There weren't drones and there weren't satellites. So our guys were deep recon troops that would get dropped in way behind enemy lines. And their job was both to get information out, but to also find people who weren't very happy with how things were going on back there and get them to join with them. And so they needed relational skills. They needed respect for cultural traditions and religious traditions. They needed empathy and a whole different kind of skill set than you might imagine, for a tough, macho special forces person. So this notion that it takes courage to show up, to pay attention, to see what's going on without overlaying your story on it or reactively responding to it. So courage to pay attention, to be mindful, to be present. Through that mindfulness, then to develop some kind of an empathic attunement to what's going on here. What do I see? How does that register in my gut and in my bones? And how does that feel? What are the needs of this other myself over there? And through that empathic resonance, then to be able to respond wisely and compassionately and get better outcomes that builds confidence and can give us greater courage to just show up a little bit more fully, and not get reactive and go into mindlessness or overwhelm. So that's kind of the architecture of what we were working with there. So we had a lab. You walk down the hallway to our lab, and you open the door, and walking into the lab, right in front of you was a big mirror, and above the mirror it said, "Caution, entering minefield." And we explained to the guys the biofeedback is like the simplest biofeedback device is a mirror. You look in the mirror, it gives you information about your physiology. Using that information, you can part your hair or put on your makeup or shave your beard straight, and that's a biofeedback device. And now let's get more subtle, learn to control muscle tension and blood flow and blood pressure and brain waves, and just deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. So you can imagine 25 I can do anything and power through anything kind of guys hooked up to biofeedback instruments where you'd have like a sensor on your finger measuring your blood temperature, your skin temperature, and the skin temperature is relative to blood flow. And would your hands get warmer or colder when you relax? Warmer. Yeah, because so as you relax, the muscles relax, the blood vessels dilate, more blood flows to the hand, your hands get warmer. What happens when you try to warm your hands is that the muscles get tense, the blood flow constricts. So imagine 25 guys hooked up to these little thermal devices. They are controlling race cars, and they're competing to see who can win the race by relaxing the most. It was comical, but so it's like these guys had this yang end of the power spectrum nailed. They could push through and tough through anything. this more yin side of kind of wei wu wei, doing with intention but without force, allowing change to happen intentionally. This was really new territory for them, and by the time we got done, they had access to a much broader spectrum of that.
Okay, so one other core component of this whole program, training program, Joel referred to it earlier as the encampment, because we didn't use the word retreat, because retreat doesn't have a very positive connotation in the military. But it was that we took the guys on a 1 month off base. We went up to New Hampshire at a Boy Scout camp, meditation retreat, mindfulness, but not only limited to mindfulness practice, different kinds of meditation, and silent for 1 month. And all kinds of after the program, we went to West Point, invited us to come out and do a briefing for them on what happened. And they, as we were talking about them, got to this, well, every level actually, their jaws were dropping, and then, you did what? For how long? Like, how did you ever manage that? You know, so the encampment was a critical piece, and that's where a lot of that inner courage. You know, Lao Tzu said, a person with outer courage dares to die. A person with inner courage dares to live. And so this was the level of, okay, what does it take to dare to live? To be successful in the mission and stay alive as long as I can to have a beneficial outcome. And so it was profoundly transformative, to say the least. We had a little bit of a mutiny in the beginning because it really, it brings up a lot. If you're silent and you're not off base and there aren't the usual distractions. And one of the leaders in our team decided it would be a good time for them. He was kicking his nicotine habit, cigarettes, and so he said, "Oh, maybe this would be good." Or, not a good idea to add withdrawal. So we had to work with a lot of other things, but it was there's so much to speak about. But I do want to say that one of our advisors were two of our Burmese teachers. Some of you may know Rina Sirkar and Tongpulu Sayadaw from Burma. They actually helped. They were very generous with their time and helped us design the protocols and for the meditation sequencing. First start with this practice. When they dropped in more concentrated and focused, then move to more, analytical or insight practices. Open up to the heart. And they were just beautiful. Do this kind of walking meditation, counting steps. And anyway, Sabrina and Tongpulu Sayadaw were very wonderful with that design, and maybe we'll move along and see if there will be some other stories to share from that encampment.
Yeah, so after the first week, they kind of figured out there really wasn't anything else to do there, and they just started leaning into the practice and dropping in and getting quieter and seeing more clearly, being more embodied, being more spacious to realize that they were more than the thoughts and the feelings that were arising and passing in the clear space of their knowing, and it just started to settle in. And at one point, I gave a talk on interconnectedness. I mean, the breath is just such an easy way into this, but as you breathe in right now, just where did this breath come from, and where does it go?
Goes back to no self.
Yeah, and just letting the drop dissolve into that ocean of interbeing, just sensing that we're all nodes of awareness woven of countless streams of energy and information arising and passing, and there really are no boundaries or sense of separate self other than what we impose on that. And they were getting softened enough that they were starting to taste it, kind of like looking at old popcorn in the popper and wondering if it was ever going to pop. And then after about 3 weeks, it started to pop. And I gave a talk on interbeing and interdependence and selflessness one night, without having to use selflessness, you know. And one of the guys raised his hand at the end of that Dharma talk, and you could just see him just trying to like figure out how to ask the question. And he says, Joel, if what you're saying is really true, then how could we ever kill anybody? Yeah. That was a golden moment. And there's no answer to that question.
No simple answer.
Yeah, there's no simple answer to that question. So we just said, let's talk about that. You know, for the next hour, hour and a half, small groups, large group, let's just wrestle with that. What does this mean? What happens if you're dug into the mountains of eastern Ukraine and a village kid comes up and finds you? What do you do with that? You know? And he's just the same age as your kid. You know? How do you deal with this kind of stuff? You know? So, yeah, the encampment was really quite a laboratory of insight and awakening.
Yeah, another time, kind of in the middle of this encampment retreat, we taught loving kindness meditation, metta. And the way we had this designed, there was a basic practice that we teach for that day or that period. And then there'd be an optional late night sitting after. The guys could go back to their hooches, go to bed, pick up their M16s, because everybody they felt as well as we when we first arrived, because they're responsible to always have their weapon with them, because they were responsible for it. And we had designed this beautiful little zendo. They had made their own zazen kind of benches, you know, the meal meditation benches, carved their platoon number into the bench. And we had an altar where they put, you know, objects that were really meaningful for them, sacred, or dog tags of companions who had died, you know, their buddies. And it really created a sacred little space to practice. And just sitting there with their M16s did not feel right to anyone. But what were they going to do? Because they're supposed to have it guarded all the time. So then I discovered that there was a walk-in freezer in the kitchen that was empty, wasn't being used. And there were some other military folks who were working with our cook, our chef, in the mess hall. And they could keep an eye on that freezer. They could lock it during the day, and they were there. And would that work? Yeah, that would work. There'd be some military personnel who could. So they'd come down in the morning, do whatever the opening, arrival, and then they'd put their M16s in the freezer. And at the end of the day, and the end of the main practice, Dharma talk for that evening, they could get, you know, tea and cookies, milk and cookies, whatever, pick up their weapon, take it back overnight. And so this one night that we had taught the metta, loving kindness practice, a lot of guys came back. You know, this, for those who may not be familiar with it, it's a practice where you're wishing well-being to yourself. You know, may I be safe, may I be happy, may I be well, you know, and different levels of well-being. And then to each other, to their buddies, to their families, and you keep expanding the practice of just wishing, you know, just the highest good to be for these beings that they loved and cared about, and including themselves, to be safe and well. And so a lot of people came back that night, and like the real tough meditators would always come back for the optional sitting, late night sitting. And there was one fellow, we called him Chief. He was one of the older soldiers, and had really good martial arts, good sitting form. You know, sat like a stone Buddha, you know, really straight back. And we looked over, and it was kind of in these little lantern light. Both Joel and I could see something. Oh, he was wearing Rangers. It was a black T-shirt. It said Rangers, Death from Above, Skull and Crossbones logo of the Rangers on the T-shirt.
with his M16 on the floor next to him because it was after tea and cookies, with optional sitting.
And Joel and I are kind of guiding. Mostly they had learned the practice, and it was mostly they were doing it on their own at that point. And we saw in the light, like glistening on the skull and crossbones, were these tears that were streaming down, as he sent metta out, as he sent loving kindness out to everyone that he cared about or might get to know or work with in the future. And it really kind of made our brains fibrillate, so to speak, just to see this tough dude with the skull and crossbones touching that place of real heart power, that place of compassion, loving kindness, and realizing, probably touching a lot of forgiveness in there as well, regret and sadness. Because a lot comes up when you're doing loving kindness. You get in touch with every place within you that isn't loving or hasn't been loving. And it's a purification as well, practice. So that was one of the memorable moments in that encampment.
Just take that into the gut check.
Yeah? Okay. Sure. Okay, we could riff for a long time on these stories, but we want to have time for questions. So at the end of the encampment, and towards the end of the program, actually, the Army wanted to test the guys and see all this meditation and all this inner work that you were doing. How did it affect their capacity as soldiers? Did it make them weaker? Did it make them stronger? So they had set up it's kind of a brutal orienteering course where they were dropped into this very rugged terrain, and they had to reach certain checkpoints by certain hours where food would be dropped in. They had to be at those checkpoints at those times if they didn't get food. They had to complete they called it the gut check. It was like you steep climb, and you think you're at the summit and you're ready to go down, then there's another summit in front of you to climb. So it was that very, very difficult orienteering course. And
with 100-pound packs, most of them, 90 to 120-pound packs. And
the only way they could successfully complete it was if everyone on the team made it with no injuries, they hadn't fallen to fighting and with each other, or difficulties that would have slowed them down or broken the team spirit and everything. And no teams before then had completed this particular orienteering course intact, as a whole team without significant injuries or obstacles. And our teams were the first two that made it, and made it well. And I was asking the same soldier afterwards, the chief who had the skull and crossbones t-shirt on, and because he was one of the older ones. I mean, you're old by the time you're 40 in that business, just with all the injuries and other things that happen. And I said, Chief, what helped you make it through? How did you deal with the stress of that test, the gut check? And he said, what kept me going? And I said, no, what? And he said, it was that heart thing. It was that heart thing you taught us. And he was referring to the loving kindness practice, the metta, that as he was like dragging, getting how difficult it was. And then he's, my buddies behind me, they're feeling this too. And may you be strong, may you be healthy, may you muster the strength and the courage that you need to keep going. And it was that care that I was putting out and feeling that gave me more energy and more capacity to actually complete the course. So that was a wonderful learning, and the Army was, of course, very inspired by the results as well.
Yeah, our approach to the work was very much in the Bodhisattva spirit. That you're doing this work on yourself in order to help others do deeper work on themselves, and the deeper our wisdom can be, the more we can fully awaken, the more capable we will be of inspiring and guiding and helping others. And it was very much in the field of that kind of interdependency. One of the guest teachers for the program was Brother David Stendelrost, who wrote Gratefulness, the Heart of Prayer,
Yeah.
Benedictine monk, elder, blazing, spirited man, about 5'4". He came in to work with the guys for about 3 days at one point, and his opening words to the men was, "When I was in the Nazi army." And he goes on to describe how, as a young man in Austria during World War II, the Nazis captured him and said, "Do you want to go in the ground, or do you want to..." So he had some time in service. And he started drawing the comparison between being a monastic and being in the military. And having to deal with the hierarchy and the stuff in both organizations. And it totally had their attention, but within about 10, 15 minutes, I don't know if there was a dry eye in the circle. And part of the magic that Brother David brought in was this sense of really having these guys, many of whom had grown up in really kind of intense religious background situations where it was really clear to them they were probably going to go to hell, so why not live it up anyway? I mean, it's just there was no redemption for them and what have you. And Brother David just so ennobled these men with looking at themselves in their willingness to sacrifice their life to protect and care for others.
He put them back in touch with their soul, really with their spirit, and they realized that, wow, I am still a spiritual being, or I there's a lot that I love and care about, and that I would, lay down my life for, to protect and take care of, and it was very ennobling for them to reconnect with that part of themselves that they just had been raised in ways that it was very fundamentalist, and it was a sense like if you don't go to church every Sunday, you're going to hell. That kind of, and so they were so touched that by the end of the program, you want to tell us?
Go ahead.
We had brought in all these wonderful guest presenters and a lot of martial artists and people we thought that would really speak to and inspire them. But we said, if you were going to be dug into enemy territory in a trench somewhere with one of our guests behind enemy lines with one of the guest speakers that we brought in, who you could really felt you could trust and depend on, who would you want to be? Who would you want that to be? And 95% of the guys said Brother David, which is like amazing because he wasn't that way, but he had that inner strength and that inner quality, and
quite tender,
really special.
So fast forward, we were training them as trainers. At the end of the program, they were dispersed into all kinds of nameless faceless special ops units that didn't have zip codes. And we couldn't fully track everybody, it just wasn't happening. But one of the teams was selected as the most outstanding team in the NATO games that year. The colonel who oversaw the program, who was an incredible being, went on to the Army War College and carried a lot of this wisdom with him. And then he went to Europe during the years just before and during the time that the Berlin Wall came down, and was running all special operations in Europe and in Eastern Europe, where a lot of our guys were kind of sporting cute clothes and mustaches and speaking German and just kind of doing what they could to kind of rattle the foundations behind enemy lines. We stayed in touch with a number of the guys who, we get a call sometimes from one guy named Gator who would say, "Hey, I'm teaching Special Forces in Emirates, and I want to teach them that meditation. What did you do with that second step?" And then we get a call from another guy another time. "Hey, I'm in Port Townsend with my family. You haven't met my kids yet. Can we come and visit?" And he came and told stories about being dug in Iraq, like 3 weeks before the war started there, getting surveillance out, and just how what he had learned helped him just keep sane. Another couple guys were in the Battle of Mogadishu and the Black Hawk Down incident. One died, one lost a leg, but said when we contacted him for a piece in the book on that, he said, I've never told anybody this.
I'm so glad you called.
But what I learned from you saved my life that day, because I was bleeding out when my leg was blown off and the copter crashed, and I was just about to go unconscious, and then I remembered some of those practices I learned from you in the lab and the meditation retreat. I was able to stay conscious and put on a tourniquet, and they got me to the
Take
hospital.
my belt off and make a tourniquet out of it.
But the real, real, I think, benefit of this was this program was sort of a bunker buster for the military training paradigm that then opened the way for millions of people and militaries around the world, I think, who mirrored off of U.S. training for mindfulness programs to happen, for deeper resilience training and biofeedback and neurofeedback. And none of those programs were as robust or deep or super saturating, but that kind of training just wasn't going on before.
No, there was no mental training. And when we actually went on base with these guys, we were amazed. They had no practices or teachings around how to work with stress, how to deal with stress. And they were in this unreasonably stressful kind of circumstances. If they had gotten word that they were going to be deployed, they couldn't even tell their families where they were going. They couldn't know. And so, it was just really a very limited training paradigm and protocol before that, and it's been majorly expanded.
Yeah, so in this day and age, the real relevance of this and where we hope this book lights some fires is for people in communities that are looking at how do we prepare for whatever it is that's coming, be it pipelines or be it meltdowns of infrastructure, supply lines, or climate catastrophe, or the big quake, or whatever, what kinds of interpersonal community building skills do we need, and what kind of interpersonal deep resilience skills do we need? So yes, this kind of training for more military. Imagine how different, people with this kind of training would probably not be shooting kids in food lines in Gaza, They'd be finding other ways to shift the system. To us, the most meaningful application of this kind of work, I think, is with young people in junior highs and high schools, young Jedi Warrior training, or whatever it would be, that kids could grow up with these kinds of skills and this kind of confidence and this kind of capacity for really deep self-regulation, self-confidence, self-mastery, selflessness, and transcendence.
We need that.
Yeah.
We need that.
Yeah. So that's really our hope for this book, is it just might kind of ignite the imagination and the dedication of people to create more avenues for these kinds of vital life skills to be more widely available.
We put together one last thing, I'll just share, and we'll get questions. We put together a 500-page after-action report, summary of everything we did with all the tests we ran, all the data, the two teams. It's fascinating to look at a lot of that data. But for us personally, the best data as far as was this a successful program or not, were the letters that we received from the families, from the kids, from the spouses, thanking us. Thank you, I have a dad again. He doesn't just come around and knock me around the house. We talk, he listens, same thing. But there's significant others, it was golden. Okay, check, it was worth it. And very meaningful to see that legacy. In fact, the week that the book was coming out, we got this email out of the blue from someone who we didn't know, who didn't even know that the book was coming out. And he wrote and he said, like, you don't know me, but I grew up with the story. My dad was in the program, and I grew up with benefiting from what he learned with you. And then I was so inspired. I went into special ops, and now I'm a chaplain in special forces. And I just
For the whole 5th Battalion.
Yeah, which is in the Middle East right now. And wanted to thank us and connect, and it's like all these things going on behind the scenes that we wouldn't have known about. And then we said, well, your timing is amazing because the story is coming out. And he said, oh, I want to get a copy. And yeah, so that was very meaningful for us, and we'd love to respond to questions. And
While we're doing Q&A, I'll pass this around. We have an email list. We